What if you could guarantee that tomorrow would be better than today? That the work you're doing will have an impact, not just in this moment or in this year, but a true and lasting legacy of positive change. What if you had the ability to inspire those around you to make the world a better place, to right the wrongs, to address injustice, and to celebrate and amplify the good that happens every day? There are millions of people who want to be part of change, but just haven't been asked. They're out there. We're sure of it. How does it feel to make a gift that changes the world? Well, magical. We're building technology to help donors support the organizations that they love the most. Whether you give a little or you give a lot, your impact is felt. And together, we can make tomorrow better than today. We're version 2, and we're reinventing technology that reimagines what's possible in fundraising.
Everybody, and welcome to Alumless. Thank you for listening. Today is October 24th, 2025. This is the Leading versus Managing and Advancement edition. I'm Ryan Catherwood. I am joined by CMAC founder and CEO, Chris Marshall. What's going on, sir?
Hey, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. We've got special guest today, Scott Greenwood, joining us. We'll bring him out into the conversation here in just a moment. We are live today on Alumless. We talk about constituent engagement strategies and education advancement. And if you're listening to us by podcast, we appreciate you adding us to your feed. We are so grateful for the teams at Protopia, Alumni Q, and Givesy for being our presenting sponsors for Season 4 of Alumless. If you have not already, definitely check out our micro consulting offerings on cmac.me, our website. That is our Alumni Engagement Strategy Lab, our office hours, and of course, our new foundational courses coming up with dates in November and December. All right. Well, we are back live here, Chris. Great show today with Scott, and we're going to talk a little bit about managing and leading teams today. I guess maybe you could get us started, Chris, when you think back to your time leading and managing staff at Lehigh and Cornell. What aspects of that work did you enjoy the most, and what kept you up at night during those periods of time?
Yeah, the favorite stuff is easy. It's that notion of being part of a team and having a common goal and setting a vision and working towards achieving that vision as a group. I mean, it sound almost like cliche leadership terms, but they're real in my world. And, I spent a long career before I got into alumni engagement work, literally as a college coach of 2 different teams, men's and women's swimming. And we had that same concept. And those lessons apply when you're running and managing and leading a team, more of a corporate work setting, if you will, in athletics. So those were the things I loved the most about it, the continuity of team and common goal and having a vision that we'll work together. The things that kept me up at night, though, were the times where you had, the hardest thing for me, it was always confronting and dealing with performance issues. So when someone is not pulling their weight and dealing with and managing the part they're supposed to manage, how do you go approach and have those conversations, a confrontational conversation sometimes, and unfortunately, more times than I would wish, to conversations where someone is leaving the organization. Those are the ones that still to this day, I have memories and scars from those difficult exit conversations.
I definitely remember the thing that kept me up at night was absolutely the staff related challenges. It was never, alumni engagement, right? It was always the team. It was, how do I rewrite job descriptions to get people more money? It was, how do I make sure that this person and that person who are not getting along right now, how do I get a kumbaya in there? We did a lot of walk and talks, where I always felt like getting out of the office was a good way to sort of have those crucial conversations. But on the flip side, there was those things that kept us up at night. But what was maybe one of your most proud moments from your time at Lehigh or Cornell when you were watching your team succeed?
The style I have, the leadership style that I have is, it starts with this. It's really hire good people and get on the same page and then get out of their way. That's kind of how we think of it. So there's a little bit of a period of time at the beginning, anybody who works with me, where I kind of micromanage just to make sure we're all on the same page and aligned on what needs to happen. And then at that point, my job is to get out of the way and let people just flourish. So the answer to your question is when seeing people, and I can think of several examples in the past where we have individuals who have just grown to a point where they're ready for that next step. And some of them are leading shops now around the country and doing other things. And so growth of individuals would be the place where I feel where I felt the most pride in seeing it. And one of the things I miss now about not having a more direct management leadership role, we have members of the CMAC team, of course, but it's a little different setup than when you're in a shop somewhere. And that's the thing I miss most about seeing that growth and trajectory of people and, sort of launching onto that next thing.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Although I have to say, I sleep better.
Amen. There's a lot of people in our roles, Ryan. As I know, I'm sure you had these conversations where I don't miss that part of it. The management day-to-day stuff is, I agree.
That was the thing that kept me up at night. And I guess since I don't have it anymore, I have to admit, sleeping's pretty easy.
Yep.
Not to rub it in. All right, let's bring out our expert. Scott Greenwood is a team member of ours. Scott is vice president on the CMAC team. He also runs his own executive coaching practice, Greenwood Executive Coaching and Consulting. Scott, what's going on? So glad you could join us.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I love the opportunity to sort of join the conversation. I loved what the two of you were saying, and it mimics a lot of the conversations that I have with my clients.
Yeah. Well, we're going to dive deep into the conversation today, but I guess I wanted to take just a minute or two before we do so to have you kind of just share a minute or two about your professional bio. I think most people who are probably on today might know you from your role at Duke University, but you've worked in colleges and universities all over the country and not just in advancement. So I thought it would be helpful for you to maybe just share a little bit about your crooked mile, as we say.
I have had a really interesting, I'm really proud of my career in higher education. I spent over 35 years directly in higher education, and I have worked at small privates, large publics. I have worked in rural and urban settings. So I've got a taste of all sorts of different institutions all across. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and worked in Pacific Northwest for a lot of time. I lived in Louisiana. I've been a chief student affairs officer. I've worked as a leader of an academic program, and then I've run 2 different engagement shops. Also have a stint as an annual funds director. And I think the reason I say that, one could either conclude that I can't hold a job, and so therefore I've moved all over to do that. But I think what it's allowed me to do, and one of the things I've noticed now as I kind of look back on my career, it really allows me to have a better and deeper understanding of higher education holistically, understanding that each institution brings such a unique and varied value to the systems itself, and that every unit within that speaks a different language. And I think has made me a better partner throughout my career in terms of I have a better understanding of what motivates and drives someone within another department. So, for example, when I was doing alumni work, I had a better understanding of the frustrations that someone in student affairs might have with the folks in the alumni office, because I had them. And so I think I really am happy about that. The other thing is that I think I've learned is that every institution has a secret sauce, something that makes them unique and different, and tapping into that. It's one of the things I like to do in consulting projects is try to understand what makes that institution special and unique. So for me, I've really enjoyed that. And I've enjoyed this new pivot into more coaching and consulting work as well.
Well, we've enjoyed having you, of course, and you've served as a leader, manager, multiple different types of teams, as you were just describing. But let's talk about how do you get the most out of your teams?
Yeah. I think I thought about that a lot. And I one of the things that's interesting is I think I now have 2 things philosophically that ground that. One is helping people find their joy. That became just something that was really passionate for me. If you can't figure out what your joy is, you need to be questioning, I think, what you're doing. And the second is to understand and to know your why. Make sure that everybody understands why. We so focus often, our work is on what are we going to do? When are we going to do it? The nuts and bolts. And we forget why we're doing what we're doing. So I think I put those as kind of my two overarching things that I think a lot about. But I also think back to my very first team that I ever managed at Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, 20 or 30 plus years ago. And luckily, I'm still in touch with the three people who reported to me at the time, but they still speak to me. And I've thanked them and apologized to them over the years a lot to say, man, I was figuring this out. And there were times I was a terrible manager and leader. And probably there were some moments that I was better. And I got better. I learned. Some of the principles I really think to get the most out, I really focused on empowering and trusting your people. Chris was saying the same thing. Hire good people, give them the tools and resources necessary to be successful, and get out of their way. I think another principle, being caring and empathetic, can go a long way. Understanding kind of what the motivations of your staff are can help you be a better manager and leader within that. I think I've learned vulnerability is an important characteristic for me in terms of letting folks really understand and seeing and encouraging them to be vulnerable as well. I just think that the other is, and I know we're going to dive more deeply into this, but knowing the difference between the skill set necessary to lead and the skill set necessary to manage, and knowing when to apply the skills at the right time. So you're leading when you need to lead, and you're managing when you need to manage. If you can kind of put that together with your team, you have the best chance of being successful because they're going to know what they need to do. They're going to feel empowered to do it. They're going to be inspired by you to do that work. And then they have the best chance of actually being successful.
Let's build on that, Scott. I love that way you contrasted the two and how you may need to be different at different moments. But let's explain from your perspective the difference between leading and managing and get into some detail there. But also, can someone be a good leader and not be a good manager and vice versa? Is it possible to have somebody who's good at one, not the other?
I really want to start with the second, but I'll go with the first question first because I think the second one is a far more interesting question in some regards. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the roles are different, and I think that a lot of people don't recognize it. If you're good, I'm going to start with being a leader. So I think leadership, the skill set that leaders need to possess, and I would say this is from data I've collected from working with leaders across all sorts of institutional places. They need to inspire. They need to create a vision. They need to set a tone. I think they need to paint a picture, be dreamers. I really think that those things are so important. A good leader is inspiring. Now, I think a good manager has some inspiration necessary, but I think good managers, they need to make sure that they know what needs to be done to implement a vision. So it's much more about kind of, I don't know, nuts and bolts, maybe too strong of a word, but it's much more about what does it take to actually accomplish that vision, and how do you make sure that you have the resources for your team and you have the right people on the team to do that kind of work. It's empowerment. I think managers need to empower their team, but the other side, and I think this gets really lost in the equation, they need to make sure and be clear about the expectations about that. I think I often say managers are pragmatic. Sometimes leaders are not. Sometimes leaders are just setting this big vision, and then it's managers who figure out how to pragmatically turn that into reality. Now, to your question about can you be a good leader, I think there are four combinations. You can be a great leader and a great manager. You can be a great leader and a really bad manager. You can be a bad leader and a really great manager, and you can be bad at both, right? And we probably all can think of examples. I think of examples as I say that right now, none of whom I will out in the course of this conversation. Within that, it's recognizing your own skill set. It's understanding what your strengths are and where you can do the best work, and then making sure that if you are more manager than leader, you have someone on your team that's inspirational. It's also necessary to be vulnerable in that because you've got to acknowledge what your strengths and weaknesses are. And if you happen to possess both skills, that's awesome. And rare, I think, if I'm honest, that somebody is great at both. But I certainly think that is entirely possible to be good at one and bad at the other. And I think probably I will say this, my experience in higher ed leaders is that they tend to be one or the other. And oftentimes there's a mismatch in their responsibilities, and we're putting people into roles that maybe they're not, they're more square pegs in round holes, or vice versa. And I think there are ways that we need to think about that as we're talking about people and how we promote and support.
Scott, we're going to take a quick break with a word from our sponsor, and we will be right back.
Meet Alumni Q, the only all-in-one platform built exclusively for higher education. From everyday events and email outreach to online giving, directories, membership management, and seamless integrations, Alumni Q helps institutions connect, engage, and inspire. Handling major reunions or homecomings? Alumni Q's signature events service has you covered with rules-based registration, name tag printing, real-time reporting, and giving integration. Visit alumniq.com to request a demo and start making meaningful connections today.
Well, Scott, obviously there are no real one-size-fits-all approaches to leading, to managing, right? So talk about some of the nuances of helping an advancement leader, for example, to become a better leader and manager.
These are conversations I have a lot of with folks. I think the problem is we are taught that we think that managing and leading are natural. And so therefore, if we're in a role as a leader or a manager, we think we should know it, and we're afraid to be vulnerable. So I spend a lot of time talking with clients about kind of really understanding their own strengths. And that can be done through a number of tools as well, but what are their real strengths and how do they then utilize those? And being vulnerable enough to acknowledge that they may need some help in a particular area. I think the other, as I said earlier, I think people are often promoted into roles based on the work that they did before, but that may not actually be the skill set needed for the job they're being promoted into. And I think that happens a lot in higher ed. I mean, higher ed, controversial to say this, but oftentimes university presidents, for instance, are put into roles running multi-billion-dollar corporations in reality because they were a good faculty member and did great research. They don't necessarily possess the skills. And I think, so higher ed sort of perpetuates this idea that if you've done this, you can do that. And I think that it's very problematic in my mind. So I think when I talk with my clients, particularly on this, I teach them that it's okay to be vulnerable, particularly with me. It's a safe setting to do that. We help them understand their real strengths, not the ones that they think they're supposed to have, and the areas where they can use some support and help and develop that particular talent, and then help them build a plan on how they might supplement that. I also spend a lot of time on going back to the why. So why do you do this, and what's your joy? And I think those are things that people can learn, and you just need to feel comfortable having a place to do that. That's someone you can do that with.
Are you seeing the management leadership Venn diagram?
Yeah.
Scott, I'm sure you've seen this, but give us your quick take on it. I think it'll be helpful for folks to see this. I'm a visual learner myself. That's why I was looking for something.
Don't describe it
okay.
too for the podcast listeners.
Yeah.
Chris.
We got people listening too, so thank you. We got a Venn diagram with management on the left, leadership on the right. They're overlapping circles, and there's certain attributes under leadership, under management, but there's a couple common in the middle between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of what I was just talking about too.
Yep.
So I mean, that's good. I do think so. For those who can see it in the middle, the overlapping things are communications, problem solving, and decision making. And I think that's true. You have to. So I don't think there's pure management, pure leadership. There is overlap. There are certain jobs that require more of one and less of one. But I think good leader needs to be able to have planning too at some level. So I think all those things are probably pretty true.
But Scott, I want to go back on script here. So talk about there's different ways of approaching situations with folks, and there's positive and negative reinforcement that I've seen used. How do those concepts? How do you recommend those be considered and deployed when it's the appropriate time for either one?
Yeah. Well, and I thought it was really interesting, Chris, in your example of in the first question, you were talking about holding people accountable and how difficult conversations. And I think it's interesting because I do think that reinforcement also has a place within performance. And I think we'll talk about performance in a couple of minutes. But I think oftentimes, as I think about these notions, fear-based managers, I've had one who liked to play what I call the blame game. So it was always who did something wrong. So the reinforcement became you didn't want to try anything because you were afraid that you were going to do something wrong and the person was going to try to blame somebody for it.
Right.
So consequently, you didn't do it. Right?
Yep.
On the opposite side, in terms of positive reinforcement, if you can teach mistakes as learning opportunities, growth opportunities, ways to say, how can we do that better? It creates an environment where people are more willing to take risks and to try things. I think there are very few moments, frankly, where I think negative reinforcement is the right answer. I may have exceptions to that I don't think about that. But I think to try to help people who hold really high standards, as many people in leadership and management roles do, is that you can't just assume that everybody has that same sense. And you need to help people find their reason why. And I think that then, if you can get positive reinforcement for the things that are good that people are doing, they'll do more of that. And if you can help turn the places where there are negative opportunities around as learning opportunities, it becomes this sort of virtuous cycle. We talk about virtuous cycle in our profession differently between giving and volunteering and the work that goes in there. But I think it's also true. That doesn't mean you don't hold people accountable. But you actually view accountability as an important tool because somebody, if they don't know they're doing something wrong, they can't change that behavior.
Right.
And other people see that behavior. So if you're a staff member and you see somebody doing really bad work and they're not being held accountable, you've just created a bigger problem throughout the organization. So those difficult conversations happening sooner actually helps everybody do that better.
Scott, one of my favorite management books of all time is First Break All the Rules by Marcus Buckingham. And I remember reading it, and there was a particular chapter on the notion of spending more time with your best people, right? And I wanted to talk about this in the context of favoritism and avoiding favoritism, because I think what I've just described and what Buckingham was getting at was not about favoritism per se, but let's talk about falling into the trap of having favorites and why that might get people into trouble.
Yeah. It is a fine line, right? We all often think back on management where we had particularly strong performers. Well, there are people we like better than others. That's going to happen. They're just people we connect with. The difference is you can't let that impact the way you manage people. So investing time in your best performers is a good thing to do because you're going to reinforce the kind of behaviors. I used to run a program for academically gifted 4th through 12th graders. I was the chief operating officer. And everybody said, well, you don't need to invest in gifted kids. They're already going to do okay. You need to invest in those poor performers. Well, the truth is, if you don't invest in the high performers, they're going to eventually give up because they're not feeling challenged. They're not feeling supported. They're not doing that. True in gifted education, but I also took that into my management style to say you need to reinforce that and help build more of that. If you give people the opportunity to become better performers, then they're going to see that that's what gets rewarded. You're going to find more of that. One of the greatest compliments I ever had was when I left the job, and my husband came to my going away party, and afterwards he came up to me and said, do you realize that everybody I talk to thinks they have a special relationship with you? I'm like, what do you mean? They are, oh, well, Scott really invests in it. The truth was, I was really interested in the people. And so I would try to understand what the motivations were for those individuals and then be able to use that in my day-to-day work with them. I think that's true now. Investing in good people doesn't have to look like you're investing in your favorite people. And oftentimes your favorite people are not necessarily your best performers. They just may be people you like. So I think for me, it is a fine line. There are times I know that I've had to stop myself and say, wait a minute. I had a client conversation where they're like, this person does great work. I just don't like them. I'm like, well, you don't have to like them, but if they're doing great work, reinforce that work.
All right. I want to get us back on our timeline where we'll move the communication question down to the second part. But Ryan, I want to ask us if you could tease a little bit about what's coming up next on Alumless.
Yeah. So recorded a fun Alumless Takes with Kira Mudd, and Kira is the Director of Alumni Engagement at the University of Rhode Island Foundation and Alumni Engagement. And I was noticing on LinkedIn how she was posting about their amazing homecoming event and a bunch of other signature events they had on campus. It's the crunch time of the semester here, right? In the heart of the fall.
A lot of people,
so many
right?
schools are coming off of their homecoming events or are about to have it. And so I wanted to do a little bit of a debrief with Kira on how that went at Rhode Island and some of the things that she's been thinking about in order to create really memorable experiences for her alumni attendees. And then, Chris, coming up on Alumless week after next, we've got Dale Wright. And Dale is currently serving as the interim vice chancellor for advancement at the University of Illinois. And he's the senior VP for the University of Illinois Foundation, someone who we got a chance to have lunch with at Case Summit in New York over the summer after he won an award for his work in the advancement space. And really looking forward to having Dale on the program.
Same here. He's going to be fun, and we'll have to keep him from being too animated. I would say that.
Well, we're going to hit a pause on the podcast edition. We'll be back after the break. And if you are watching on YouTube or on LinkedIn, thank you so much for tuning in and making Alumless part of your routine. We are grateful to have you as part of the CMAC family. So we'll be back right after this.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.